Hi again then guys, and welcome to of course the final of the 5 cars that we have to review from 1.38 in Gran Turismo Sport, and this one is not so much of a saving the best till last, it's more like saving the least interesting car until last, or at least that's what you could think on the surface, because there are some interesting things about this car, the Honda Fit Hybrid, which might actually surprise you. Now the first one is one that you don't hear many people talking about at all, because it's not something that you would generally look into in the game. It is something that I talk about a lot here on the channel, and I include it in the description of every video of every car that we review, but in the game it doesn't actually show it, not in the way that we do at least. And that is power to weight ratio. Because if I asked you what universe would you have to live in where a Honda Fit Hybrid would have a significantly better horsepower per tonne ratio than a 3.2 litre Audi TT Quattro, you would probably think not the reality that we're living in. And yet it is, because the TT Quattro in this update puts out only 119 horsepower per tonne, mainly because it's pretty hefty at 1520 kilos with 240 horsepower to work with, or just under. This car, on the other hand, only has 138 horsepower, so basically a full 100 less, but it weighs half a metric ton less, at 1,080 kilos. So the horsepower per ton, ironically, and definitely surprisingly, is higher, 128 to the 119 of the Audi. That's not a small difference for a car like this, especially when you factor in that the Audi is just under 60 grand, and this is 16 instead, or just under 17 grand. Now of course that doesn't mean it's going to be as quick, but it is a pretty healthy way to start the review at least. Now as far as the engine, of course it's a hybrid, so you've got the motor in there as well, the battery packs and whatnot adding on to the weight, because let's be honest, close to 1100 kilos is actually kind of hefty, probably more so than what you'd expect for a very small hatchback like a Honda Jazz or the Fit as it's called here. So 1,080 kilos with all of that tech inside is not too bad. And of course cars these days tend to be getting a bit heavier again with the safety tech put into them, that kind of thing, but mostly it is hybrid tech that is still adding a lot of weight, the batteries, the motors, in addition to a regular engine in particular, which is of course what this car uses. Now that regular engine is mounted, or mated even, to a 7-speed gearbox, which is another interesting thing about the car, and let's be honest, there aren't too many interesting things about this vehicle from a performance point of view at least, but you are looking at 138 horsepower, which is probably more than you'd be expecting from a car like this, and 98 pound-feet of torque. So it doesn't quite have as impressive the torque output of a full EV, something like a Nissan Leaf for instance, if memory serves, is torquier than this. I think that might have something like 140 or 150 pound-feet, somewhere in that region. Probably a bit less, but that's the number that's coming to mind. This being a hybrid, it's not as torquey, but that's not bad. And of course we already mentioned the weight and the horsepower per tonne, so for 17 grand it's not exactly a car that's going to get most people's pulses racing, but it is kind of a sleeper in a funny kind of way, because most people are not clamouring for the car, are not particularly excited for the car, and yet now that it's here, it has more merit than you might think. Especially because even though it's a hybrid, or at least has electric drive involved in the process, it's not in Group X. Now of course some people were trying to correct, I guess, what I'd said in the day one review for this whole pack, where I said it was kind of dumb that this car is in N100 whereas the BMW i3 is in Group X, trying to explain to me how that's because this is a hybrid and that one's a full EV. I'm aware. You know, I'm a mechanic. I know the difference between a hybrid and an EV, but thanks for the help. Now, the reason why I raise that is because it's simply not fair. It's not about which one's electric and which one's a hybrid. It's dumb that the BMW is even in Group X to begin with, and it's got nothing to do with the refueling or not refueling in the pit lane. It simply should not be in Group X. It's not fast enough to really beat anything, and it makes about as much sense as a Nissan Leaf being in Group X. Look how slow that was in the previous game. It was like a 75 mile per hour car. This, in comparison, is way quicker. So it's a quicker vehicle than the Leaf, it's quicker than the aforementioned BMW as well, so it's actually better than some of those EV vehicles. Yet another arrow in the quiver of not having vehicles like that in Group X. It's so stupid. Now, as far as how this one performs, well, it's a Honda Fit hybrid with 140 horsepower. How do you think it performs? It's perfectly fine. It's a front-wheel drive car. The handling is good, but even then not amazing. It handles as you would hope a small lightweight hatchback would. And overall, I would say that my review for this vehicle is not that it's bad at any particular thing, or that it's amazingly good at any particular thing, because it's kind of not really trying to be. It's a practical, small, environmentally friendly hatchback. It's not trying to break lap records, it's not trying to set speed records, and it's not really even trying to be the most efficient thing out there. It's just trying to be more efficient. So with all of that in mind, I kind of like that the car was included from one sense, but also in another sense not so much. I dislike the fact that of the 5 cars chosen for the pack, this was one of them. If this were a 9 or 12 car pack like we used to get, it wouldn't bother me in the slightest. Just like Forza includes some relatively unassuming cars in their packs as well, the difference is here you've only got 5 cars. Why would you make one of those 5 this? Not that nobody likes it, I'm not saying that, I don't even dislike it, it just seems like an unnecessarily aggro-inducing pick. You have to know that the community as a whole is going to complain about a car like this, so to still choose it is bold, and I commend Polyphony for that, but at the same time, not particularly wise a choice. It's not like this is going to have its one make series coming to the game anytime soon, and it's not like it's going to break lap records anywhere. So you've given players something which certainly harkens back to the more realistic car lineup of Gran Turismo's past, and that's actually what I was saying about what I do like about this car. It's very Gran Turismo 2-esque. And I believe I mentioned that in my overarching review as well, where it's reminiscent of the normal cars that we used to see a lot more in Gran Turismo, especially in GT2 and GT4. But this isn't that game, and that's why it doesn't really work that way. It's almost like Kaz or whoever is in charge of selecting the cars for each pack, or at least what cars are included in each pack in terms of the rollout. It's almost like they are trying to treat the cars that are added to the game as if this were a normal Gran Turismo game. But the problem is, it is not a normal Gran Turismo game. The players have made that clear, the Nations Cup stuff makes that clear, even the layout of the game itself makes it very clear that this is not a traditional Gran Turismo title. So to try and put traditional, sometimes even normal cars that you would usually get in Gran Turismo into this title just doesn't work. Because the cars, I mean, unless they're amazingly good in any particular category, they are essentially useless. Now, in any other Gran Turismo game, I would have no qualms about a car like this being included. If this were in GT6, you wouldn't even notice. We have plenty of stuff like this. But in GT Sport, when there are so few cars being added in updates to begin with, and then add that on top with the fact that the car is not particularly good at any form of racing, it's just such a strange choice. And it's difficult to toe the line for me between seeming ungrateful, but also not just pandering to Polyphony and supporting everything they do out of blind fandom. Being objective goes both ways. You can't just be positive all the time. So for me, there's nothing wrong with the car. It's not bad at any particular thing, but neither is it particularly good. So if some people out there do love this vehicle or really like it or get some enjoyment out of it, for N100 for instance, then I'm really happy, because that means it has some use. For most of us, we probably won't use it that much, and for an even higher percentage, you probably won't use it at all, let's be honest. So ultimately those are my thoughts on this car. An interesting choice, but I just don't think it falls in line with this game, and I know that's a sentiment that a lot of people have had about a number of the cars that have been added, but some of them definitely stand out to me personally, objectively speaking as a reviewer, more so with that kind of problem, and this is one of them. It doesn't belong in the game. This belongs in Gran Turismo 6 or 7, not in sport. But overall, that's it for my review. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.